All right, chapter 12. So we're continuing the discussion on experiments, but now we're talking about experiments with more than one independent variable. So this is just as a review. I'm showing some examples of experimental designs with just one independent variable. Remember, that's the one that's manipulated. And one example is you've got placebo group and a drunk group, one that gets alcohol, and then you measure a couple of measures of aggression. So the dependent variable here is a measure of aggression, intensity of shock, and then there's another dependent variable, the duration of the shock. But there's still just one independent variable, and that's the group, okay, the placebo group or the drunk group. Okay, so this was the manipulation. This was the dependent variable that depended on that. Okay. Here's an even simpler design with just one dependent variable, breaking onset time, and the independent variable is you're either on your cell phone or you're not on your cell phone when driving. Okay, so here's cell phone condition. That's the independent variable. Data that you collect from the two groups is the dependent variable, and that's the breaking onset. Okay, so we need to introduce this term, an interaction. Okay. This may sound like something in social psychology or, we're just talking about human interaction or whatever, but this is a statistical term in this context. And this can be described as a difference in differences. Okay? Typically in an experiment, you're looking for some kind of a difference, right, between group A and group B, treatment and placebo, drunk group, placebo group, whatever. Here you're going to have multiple independent variables, and you're going to see if the differences between the different levels of them are different depending on the other one. Okay, so the effect of one independent variable depends on the level of the other independent variable. Okay, it's basically saying it depends. Okay, and let me give you a couple examples. Okay, so this isn't real data. This is just some intuitive interactions. Okay, so you have a certain rating of how much you like food, okay, and here's one independent variable, the food type, ice cream and pancakes, and then the other independent variable is temperature. It's got two levels as well, hot and cold. Okay, and you can see that, do you like hot food? Well, it depends. It depends on what kind of food you're talking about. Okay, or you could say, do you like pancakes? Well, it depends on whether they're hot or cold. So that's one way in which you might observe an interaction. Okay, that's called a crossover interaction. Okay, and here's kind of similar. It's still an it depends kind of thing, but you really would describe it more as especially when. Okay, so rating deliciousness of a sandwich, it's definitely it's always going to be better with bacon. Okay, sandwiches are better with bacon. So here's one independent variable, no bacon and bacon are the two levels. The other independent variable is avocado or no avocado. Okay, so if you have a sandwich with bacon, it's always more delicious, but especially when you add avocado as well. So here's an example study from the textbook, which we'll reference quite a bit. You have either driving while talking on a cell phone or not on the phone, and then the other independent variable, which also has two levels, is younger or older. Okay. Now, what you'll get used to seeing a lot of is cells like this. Okay, a table like this with these 4 cells, indicating all the different combinations of the two IVs. Okay, so you can have IV level 1 on cell phone, and then you can have IV 2 level 1, young drivers on cell phones. You can also have young drivers not on phones, older drivers on phones, older drivers not on phones. Those are the 4 possible combinations of the 2 levels of the 2 independent variables. Okay, so this is a 2x2 factorial design. Okay. So why would you use a design like this? One thing you can do it for is to see if a particular effect will generalize to another situation or another group. So it kind of tests the limits of what the effect is. Okay, so in this example, is the effect of cell phone use on breaking onset time limited to just young people or just to old people, or is it common to both? Okay, and hopefully, oh, and by the way, there is no interaction there. Okay, and I'll explain later how you can tell. But just briefly, it does matter whether you're on your cell phone or not. You're going to brake slower when you're on your cell phone, and older drivers brake slower than younger drivers, but there is no difference in the differences. Okay, whether you're old or young, being on your phone impacts your braking, and it impacts it about the same whether you're old or young in this example. Okay, so there's no interaction there. There are differences, but there's no difference in the differences. So maybe when I was talking about testing the limits, hopefully you thought of external validity. This is one way that you can get closer at external validity for an experiment, okay, seeing if an effect will generalize to another condition. We talked about moderators already. Interactions show moderators. Okay, they're the same thing. If there's a moderation relationship, you could also describe it as an interaction. Okay, they're kind of used in different contexts, different kinds of statistical tests. The results are described more as interactions versus moderation. Moderation is more the term used in regression analyses, whereas interaction is used in what's called ANOVA, analysis of variance. But they're actually the same. They're both grounded in what's called the general linear model, which we won't get into, so they're actually the same thing. So you can use them to test theories, seeing if there's a certain effect that you'd expect to see based on a certain theory. Like the example here is if the mental representation that we have of kind of the stereotype of alcohol causing aggression, if that leads you to then be more prone to aggressive thoughts or recognizing aggressive words in this case, okay, after just seeing an image of alcohol versus a plant. Okay. So this would be an interaction that does support that theory that people cognitively associate alcohol cues with aggressive concepts. Okay. The other term that we need to talk about in these kind of designs is a main effect. Okay, so that's describing an overall difference, whereas, as I mentioned, interactions describe a difference in differences. Okay, typically an interaction is what you really care about as the researcher. Okay, there are kind of the possibilities that you could have in a 2x2 factorial, where you have two independent variables, each with two levels. You could have a main effect of IV1. Okay, so in the driving example, you could just have a main effect of having a cell phone. Okay, so does it make a difference regardless of age? Does it make a difference whether you're using your cell phone or not? Okay, the other one could be a main effect of IV2, whereas in that case you're asking, regardless of cell phone use, does it matter how old you are in your braking time? Does age matter? Okay, the interaction is, if there is an interaction, then you would say, well, the effect of age on, or probably more likely would be, how you phrase it would be, does the effect of cell phone use depend on age? Okay, so maybe you find that for young people it doesn't really affect their driving that much, but for old people it does a lot. Okay, so that's an interaction. Okay, so you can have statistically significant main effects in a study. You could have just one of them that's significant, both that are significant. You could have both main effects significant and the interaction is not. You could have only the interaction is significant when the main effects are not. You could have any combination of the above, basically. Okay? Or they could all not be significant. This is a way to easily tell from a graph whether or not there's an interaction. Okay? So if you're seeing parallel lines, lines, then there's probably not an interaction. Okay, so sometimes it's actually these graphs are shown with lines. Okay? These ones are basically parallel. Of course, they're not exactly parallel, but there's probably not an interaction here. Whereas these ones are crossed, so there is an interaction there. And they don't necessarily have to cross. It could be you have kind of the spreading interaction like we showed before, where one just has a much steeper slope than the other one, but they're still non-parallel. Okay? Sometimes bar graphs are used instead, but you can kind of imagine drawing some lines here. You can see that these ones aren't parallel, whereas these ones are. Okay, so parallel, probably no interaction. Non-parallel, probably is an interaction. How you describe this in words. So here's child chess experts versus adult novices, a number of items recalled in a memory test. But those items are either digits or chess pieces. As you could say, child chess experts can remember more chess pieces than digits, but adult chess novices can remember more digits than chess pieces. Okay, so there are differences, but they're different depending on whether you're talking about child chess experts or adult novices. Here with alcohol intake and aggression, you could say the drunk group was more aggressive than the placebo group, especially for heavy men. Okay, so yeah, that would be an example of a spreading interaction. Okay. Now, just so you know, main effects, oftentimes those are effects that are already established in the literature. So they're often analyzed, but maybe just more as a control, just to make sure that your experimental manipulation is working and that you're replicating what's previously been shown. Usually the really exciting, juicy finding is the interaction. Okay. And oftentimes that's what we're interested in because we hypothesize that things are going to depend, that it's going to be more complex than just, the effect being general across every situation. Usually things are going to depend on which situation you're in. Okay. That's the end of this first part.